welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, and I have a lot of stuff to talk with you guys about here today. The first day of free agency here in around the NFL. I have a lot of stories and a lot of breaking news to get to you guys, starting off with something unrelated to football, just something that I saw on the Chip Shot story. Xavier Worthy, what he had to say about Patrick Mahomes and getting a congratulation text from him and alluding to the fact that it could be a match made in heaven for Worthy and the Kansas City Chiefs heading towards the NFL draft. Later on, I'll bring you arguably the biggest news of the day in Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That broke out early this morning on Monday around 1 a.m. It was when the notification went out. I'll dive into that. In the second half of the show, I'll bring you the news around the Atlanta Falcons signing Kirk Cousins to a massive deal now that he couldn't agree any contract with the Minnesota Vikings. He goes to Atlanta and starts a new era there with all their young talent. Before I wrap it up in the last segment talking about all the running backs that just flew off the shelves and were signed to different teams. I don't think any running back stayed with any other teams, so there's going to be a lot of new beginnings, a lot of new experiences with these running backs and these teams. All of that heading into today's episode. But before I dive into the first segment, as always, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, want to engage with me during the live show, to please use the tip and donations link you see running across the ticker below me. The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, it's gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question pop up live here in the chat next to me on my right. And in doing this, I can see all your questions and I'm able to engage with you guys. It makes the show a lot more fun, especially when we have big topics to talk about like we do today. Again, it's much appreciated every time you guys do that, and it's a big help for not only this show, but all the shows across our network. Now, saying that, I can jump into the first story, the Chip Shot story that has to do more with the NFL draft before I get into all the breaking news. So, the first story is on Xavier Worthy, and he obviously was the player now in the record books for setting the new 40-yard dash time at 4.1 seconds. And that created a lot of headlines, a lot of news for him, a lot of good publicity for him, because I mentioned on this show before that I expect him now to kind of creep into early second round, potentially late first round type of prospect with his 40 time. He didn't run any drills or anything like that, but he was able to put that out there on the map, and now he gets people interested. He gets a lot more people looking at him. Now I'm sure a lot more teams are gonna head to his pro day now that they see that he's got record-breaking speed like he showed at the Combine. And recently he went on an interview with USA Today, and he referenced how Patrick Mahomes was one of the people that congratulated him on his record-setting performance. And then he alluded into the fact later on in that conversation that he referenced how Patrick Mahomes used Tyreek Hill in all their 5 years together and how potent of a duo they were there in Kansas City and how important he was to him. And obviously the speed jumps out for both of them. Tyreek Hill, arguably the fastest player in the NFL. Now Xavier Worthy sets this record time. There's going to be comparisons there, especially if he gets drafted there, which now he is in their range sort of. And in that same interview, he went on to say, in his words, "In a perfect world, I would definitely want to go to the Chiefs, just the way Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs improvise and use you. They had Tyreek Hill, the way they use him, I feel like that would be perfect. Like, that would be a perfect fit for me." And, you know, seeing that and saying that first when I saw that quote was, my initial reaction to that was that he was very open about it. You know, he'll talk highly, like any prospect would, about any team that's interested, or if they're asked a question about any team in particular, they're going to say, oh yeah, I would love to go there, this, that, and the other, why this would all work out for me. But with the Chiefs, I think it is different because of where he's supposed to go. He wasn't really getting any attention really in the first round before his 40-yard dash time. Now that he's got that record on there and the Chiefs are in need of a wide receiver, they've They have Miko Hardman and Marquez Valdes-Scantling as free agents. They are certainly in need of a wide receiver, and they don't really have a lot of cap space to work out a deal with a big name receiver in free agency like a Calvin Ridley or somebody along those lines. And they're obviously still working out a deal with their star defensive tackle Chris Jones. They might want to get a deal with L'Jarius Sneed done. So all those, I'm sure, take precedent over finding another wide receiver. I'm sure looking at the draft is going to be the way they go. And with Xavier Worthy, I think he could be a great prospect for them because of all the intangibles that he has, similar to Tyreek Hill, and why that would be such a good fit for them. Like I mentioned before, the 40 definitely helped him raise his stock, and now people are looking at him a little bit differently. And just looking at some of his highlights before and after I saw his combine performance, you can kind of see a little bit of, I don't want to say Tyreek Hill, but he has good route running, and he's not just all about the 40, all about the speed, like people might want to say now after setting this record time in the 40. Yeah, he's got that speed, but at the same time, he uses it very well when he's going in and out of his breaks, trying to get open in one-on-one coverage and stuff like that, because he is going to have a lot of that with Travis Kelce out there, getting a lot of attention, a lot of double teams on Travis Kelce. Xavier Worthy, if he were to pair up with Rashee Rice, would be an exciting young duo, and they always get a lot of opportunities, which is why you saw Rashee Rice get a lot of pretty decent games in his first year. He got a lot of experience. You could argue he became their number one receiver. You could say that was him or Miko Hardman or whoever you might think, but he got a lot more exposure out there to what it was really like being an NFL receiver, if instead of going to another team that already had a bunch of receivers and a lot of prominent weapons, that he would be the fourth or third option. The Chiefs were, I guess, unfortunate enough in some instance where they didn't have any great wide receivers, but they were very lucky in that they found a Rashee Rice, and now they're being linked to Xavier Worthy, and they're able to build that up now with younger talent to support Patrick Mahomes. And with these younger receivers, you might question their ability to jump in right away. You know, not everyone is going to be like a Rashee Rice. Well, the only difference is if they were to say to go to I don't know, the Cardinals, if you want to look at number 4 with Marvin Harrison, there might be doubts around there because he is a rookie. He has to get adjusted to the NFL, but not everyone has Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback. Having him, a Tom Brady, a Peyton Manning, or guys like that, it makes your job so much easier, and it makes you understanding the game a lot more easier than if you were to go in with a rookie quarterback, a guy that has struggled, isn't really near the top of the top. Patrick Mahomes is a generational type of player, is a generational type of quarterback. He understands the game in a very different way than most other quarterbacks do. So getting drafted to that scenario, plus you have Andy Reid, who's arguably the best head coach nowadays in the NFL, or you can make an argument for top 3, top 5 in NFL history. You add that with the type of quarterback that Patrick Mahomes is, a lot of these rookies can just come in and just not really have to think too much because the head coach, the quarterback, make their playing style, make whatever sort of role that they fit into a lot easier than if they were out there with a lot of pressure on them, trying to figure out also their routines, how it all works in the NFL, trying to figure out, what kind of routes to run, where to attack a defensive back. All of that really seamlessly goes away because of how much easier it is to play under Andy Reid with a Patrick Mahomes. It makes you look a lot better and a lot more important to a team when all of that pressure is just off of your shoulders. And going deeper into this conversation more on Worthy, you could say, is it worth it to go after Worthy, say in the first round? And to that, I would say, the Chiefs don't really need too much outside of more weapons. They could only really get better if you think about it, because they were already, you could say, the worst team that Patrick Mahomes has had in his time with the Chiefs, offensively at least, because their defense was great, was phenomenal down the stretch there with Steve Spagnuolo head coaching or being the defensive coordinator for that group. And Offensively, it wasn't full of stars. They had Travis Kelce. Isaiah Pacheco was great, but other than that, it was a lot of Patrick Mahomes and making the guys around him better. They only have to get better in that aspect, and it's a lot easier said than done. But they have signed Chris Jones to a deal. They got back one of their linebackers in Drew Tranquill. L'Jarius Sneed is franchise tagged, and if they can't work out a deal, he's the only one that will be lost. But other than that, if you only need one or two positions outside of corner, why would you not just use it in the first round on a receiver like Xavier Worthy that fits a mold that you already know you've had success with? That over-the-top receiver, that quick, very fast receiver that can get open regardless because of just plain physical, athletic ability in his speed. You already know that's worked before, and there's no guarantees with a rookie like Xavier Worthy, but I think it's worth a shot because you have Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes that cover a lot of blemishes where you might have some, and it won't be a lot because you have other guys on your team like Sky Moore and just receivers like that you could try out and not throw Xavier Worthy into the fire right away. But I think he's good enough where you spend a first round pick on him, and I think he would surprise a lot of people just on his readiness because he was at a school like Texas, a big program with a lot of big time receivers, or not receivers, just players in general that will get drafted early in the draft. All that competition, all that NFL-like experience, I think will translate very well to wherever team he goes to, but in particular the Chiefs because of how ready they are. Everyone's talking about a three-peat already. They're ready to do that. They just need a few pieces here and there to make this team as complete as it ever was and could ever be because of how good they are just overall. And they're young. Their defense is very young. Other than Chris Jones maybe being one of the oldest guys on that team, they are very young, like 26-ish to 25 on average on their team. And overall, Travis Kelce is also the next oldest player other than Patrick Mahomes, I guess. But they're a very young team, and I think a lot of people forget about that. Adding Worthy over some free agents as well. You don't want to go and spend money because, frankly, the Chiefs don't have any. I think Worthy just makes the most sense, low risk, because say if he doesn't work out at all, you still are basically working with the same thing you had last year, and you could try and fill that position with some low-end free agent wide receivers like a Darnell Mooney who's out there, or a Marquise Brown if you want to bring him in from the Cardinals. You could go out and get those guys if you're really not sure, but I think taking a risk on Worthy will pay out a lot better for the Kansas City Chiefs than a lot of people realize, and it always turns out like this, it seems, with the Chiefs. They are drafting at the end of rounds. A lot of people aren't really paying attention who they draft, and then they turn out to be this all-pro, at least Pro Bowl type of player because of their natural ability, but because they're drafted into such a ready-to-win-now team. That's the biggest thing, at least to me, that I've harped on this show. You have to have the support. You have to have the foundation. If you're a quarterback, receiver, any position, if you're a rookie, to have real success and real impact in the NFL right away. And the players that get drafted late in rounds are often the players that can produce to the best of their abilities right away as soon as they get into the NFL. But regardless of that, I'll leave that conversation there. I'd love to know what you guys think, or if you guys don't think it's worthy, I would love to know what other prospect you think would be perfect for the Chiefs there at the end of the first round. But saying that, it'll bring me to my first break in the show, but I have a lot of NFL news that I want to get into later on the show, from Russell Wilson going to the Steelers, Kirk Cousins signing with the Atlanta Falcons, and all the running backs and where they ended up on the first day of free agency. So don't go anywhere. I'll bring you all those stories right after this break. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit, I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant, I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'll get into this story right away. One of the biggest stories that broke in the NFL free agency period, the start of it being today. This story, the first quarterback on the move was Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, a lot of people have asked me about this because I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I do follow the team a lot. I have been for a number of years now, and there was a lot of talk about Russell Wilson, Kenny Pickett, what their general manager Omar Khan said at the NFL Combine in regards to their quarterback. Of course, it was the first question asked to Omar Khan because a lot of people want to know. Kenny Pickett hasn't had the best run of success in Pittsburgh thus far in his career. He's had to deal with injuries, being in and out of the team. He wasn't the initial starter right away. He had to come in. When Mitchell Trubisky was signed, he was actually the starter, and Kenny had to sit behind him before he eventually did start. But now we're at a point where Trubisky's gone, Mason Rudolph is a free agent, Kenny Pickett is the only one under contract, and you have to figure out the quarterback situation. That is a given. You're not going to compete against anybody with no quarterback, and Kenny Pickett has raised more questions than answered them. I think he's had some good performances, but other than a late game comeback here and another one over there and looking decent at the end of his first year, this second year wasn't at all to what a lot of people expected. You can attribute that a lot to the offensive coordinator carousel that happened with Matt Canada, then Eddie Faulkner coming in and being the interim offensive coordinator alongside Pat Sullivan, the quarterback coach. So there was a lot of voices in his ears. He obviously heard the criticism, and it didn't work out for the Steelers. And now you transition into this offseason, and Russell Wilson's out there, Kirk Cousins is out there, Baker's out there, Justin Fields is in trade rumors. But with you being the Steelers and those other guys probably being out of your market zone, it always seemed to me in the back of my mind it was going to be Russell Wilson. Just the way his contract worked out, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm going to mention here in a second. His contract was the most friendly compared to those other guys that were looking for longer term, more guaranteed money deals. Because of the way things ended in Denver, because of how Russell Wilson had a massive contract, but because of him being released and all the obligations that the Broncos had to him still with his money, it's reported now that the Broncos are still going to pay Russell Wilson $38 million of his contract salary, and the Steelers, by signing him, will only have to pay essentially a one-year deal on $1.2 million that they actually have to pay Russell Wilson. So from that aspect, it's a win, because if it doesn't work out, you don't invest a lot of money into Russell Wilson, who is on the north side of 30. I want to say he's 35-ish or 34, around there. But you're not allocating all this money to him. You're not tying your hands to him, and just depending on how he does is how the organization will go. This is more like a rent, and almost looking at the bigger picture, you're renting Russell Wilson for a year in hopes, I think best case scenario for the Steelers, I think they believe that Kenny Pickett could still turn out to be a solid quarterback. They just need him maybe to develop a little bit more, one more year, and then they could really see where he's at with all the improvements that seem to be coming in this offseason. With Russell Wilson, he's a proven quarterback, Super Bowl level quarterback. And I think right now, in this moment, he is an upgrade over Kenny Pickett because of just last year. I saw one of the craziest stats that Russell Wilson threw 26 touchdowns just this year, and Kenny Pickett over the last 2 seasons has thrown 25. So that says a lot just in and of itself in that stat. But if you want to look at just last season in terms of numbers, Pickett threw barely over 2,000 yards. Wilson threw over barely 3,000 yards. Kenny Pickett only played 12 games, and Russell Wilson played 15. But the reason that is because the Broncos benched them there towards the end of the season because he wouldn't restructure his deal and because he wouldn't forego his injury clause in his contract. They had him sit out, so he missed the last 2 games. So it's not like he was injured compared to Kenny Pickett, who has dealt with multiple injuries now. And yards per game, Wilson has thrown 200 yards per game. Pickett was more at 172 yards per game. And touchdowns to interceptions, Pickett threw 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, and Russell Wilson threw 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. The numbers say a story. They're pretty cut and dry in terms of how I just read them out. But if you just look at them play and their style, a lot of times Kenny was criticized for not throwing it over the middle, was criticized for holding the ball a little bit too long or just being a bit inaccurate, not really pushing the ball downfield. A lot of what Russell Wilson does give you is those deficiencies that you saw with Kenny Pickett, like the deep ball down the field. Russell Wilson's known for throwing one of the best deep balls down the field and being one of the most accurate with them as well. And you just have to do that when you have guys like George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Pat Freiermuth over the middle. If you're not going to throw over the middle, you really negate what those kind of players can give you, the kind of talents that they have, the catch radius that George Pickens has, Pat Freiermuth has. You're taking at least 50 to 40% of that away by not throwing to them over the middle or throwing to them deep. We saw George Pickens make a lot of crazy catches. So you can throw it up to him one-on-one, and they probably should one-on-one, but a lot of times it seemed like Kenny was very hesitant, wasn't really trusting it, and he either took a sack or it was incomplete or it just looked like the receiver to quarterback weren't on the right page, and it looked very ugly for a majority of the season. It was a miracle that they made the playoffs, but that's just what the Steelers have become. They'll turn an ugly situation into a positive situation. Mike Tomlin will continue to not have a losing season, and they'll just continue to ride the ship through all the storms and disasters that they may seem to be going through. They're still there in playoff contention, and now with Russell Wilson, I think it makes them a bit more dangerous. No pun intended with the whole Danger Russ monocle, but regardless, in all seriousness, it's an improvement for sure because in a division like the AFC North and just the conference of the AFC, you have to have a quarterback that can exploit other teams' deficiencies and just get the best out of his players. Just in the AFC North, you have Lamar, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson. Depending on how you feel about him, on his abilities out there, if you think he still can be good or not, he's still a prominent name. He's had success in this league. He's been exciting, dynamic, whatever acronym you want to, or whatever attribute you want to attach to him. He's a prominent name at quarterback, and the Browns have one of the more solid teams overall in the whole NFL. So all 3 of those teams are very good. The Ravens, just breaking it down one by one, if you look at the Ravens, they have some very significant free agents to deal with. Patrick Queen is out there. Geno Stone has been very good for them. They could both leave, potentially join their old defensive coordinator, Mac McDonald, over in Seattle. Who knows? If they lose those 2 guys, you don't know where you really stand. Running back-wise, they don't have J.K. Dobbins or Keaton Mitchell. They're both free agents. Gus Edwards just signed with the Los Angeles Chargers. So your 3 main running backs could all potentially be gone. And you still don't really have a number 1 receiver for Lamar Jackson. If you really think about it, Odell's not under contract. Yeah, it looks like Rashad Bateman could be good. Zay Flowers is solid. I really like him, but it's not eye-catching really to the highest extent. And then if you look at the Bengals, T. Higgins just requested a trade. Tyler Boyd doesn't look like he's re-signing with them. Joe Burrow's coming off an injury. Joe Mixon has been in trade rumors and just release rumors as well because of the cap hit that he has to deal with and because he's a running back and the value that they hold. Their offense could look a little bit differently. And defensively, one of their top defensive backs, Chidobe Awuzie, just signed with the Tennessee Titans. So he's gone, and you don't really know where they're going to stand in terms of defense and in terms of offense if they lose that dangerous trio that they had in T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. It'll be tough to trade T. Higgins because he is franchise tagged. They don't have to trade him away. But who knows with how free agency works and how all these negotiations work. Say he is gone, you only have Jamar Chase, and you can't really name another weapon that Joe Burrow has to throw coming off in a very bad injury with an already shaky offensive line. He might have to hold the ball longer, and you could put him in more danger with a lack of weapons. And then you go over to the Browns, which in my opinion are going to be the most competitive. Depending on who their quarterback is, they have Nick Chubb, a great running back. David Njoku broke out a lot towards the end of the season last year. They just traded for Jerry Jeudy, and depending on where you stand on him, I think he could reinvigorate himself with Cleveland and be that Robin to Amari Cooper's Batman and just help out Amari Cooper more because he is getting older and he can't do everything. Having a guy like Jerry Jeudy will definitely alleviate some of that pressure for whoever is at quarterback. And when you have Nick Chubb back as well, he'll take a lot of pressure off those two guys and whoever the quarterback may be. So saying all that, just going back to the Steelers and what kind of situation they fall into, they needed a guy to compete with those quarterbacks. And with all the questions around this division, if the Steelers could just figure it out a little bit, with their quarterback at least, it could be a lot closer than I think a lot of people give them credit for because of how good their defense is and the weapons that they have on offense. They're turning towards a more run-heavy offense, controlling the clock, keeping the possession in the offense's hands. It'll all complement them in a way that I think it'll be a lot closer than people might think. They'll be a lot more competitive if Russell Wilson turns out better than Kenny Pickett. It's hard to be worse than what they did last season, so I do expect an improvement, but it all just depends on how much an improvement it will be. And all this all sort of broke down very quickly because of the meeting that they had on Friday. Adam Schefter reported that Russell Wilson first visited with the Giants, very quick exploratory meeting. Then he went over to the Steelers, and he reported that they met for 6 hours on Friday. He talked with Mike Tomlin, Arthur Smith, and the two sides had already a mutual interest. But later, NFL.com's Tom Pelissero reported that it was actually Cam Hayward and Mike Tomlin who were the strongest advocates to bring in Russell Wilson. So, you have arguably two of the biggest voices in the organization advocating for Russell Wilson. You're going to take that seriously, and they did. And now Russell Wilson ushers in a new era for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And with Russell Wilson coming in, I think you can all but guarantee Mason Rudolph most likely won't be coming back. The Steelers like to have 3 quarterbacks, potentially 4, heading into training camp. But, I don't think they'll allocate some money to try and re-sign Mason Rudolph just because of the fact it's a bit more expensive, and they could always draft a younger quarterback in the draft in the later rounds if they feel like there's a guy there that they like. And all of that being said, there's the biggest thing with this that I found interesting was that Adam Schefter reported that Russell Wilson wasn't going to go anywhere, that he didn't feel he wasn't going to be the starter. And that's the biggest thing about this, right? Because Omar Khan said he wanted competition. He had full faith in Kenny Pickett. With Russell Wilson being there, to me, it just seems inevitable that he is going to be the starter regardless of what Tomlin says, Omar Khan says. Russell Wilson wouldn't have signed there if he didn't really think he was going to have a great shot to be the number one guy, start a bunch of games. He wasn't going to be on the sidelines trying to reinvigorate Kenny Pickett's career. He wasn't there to do that. He's looking out for himself and getting back the career that he had, and a lot of people think that it's already down the drain. A lot of people don't believe he'll get back to that level. He's got something to prove, and I think that in combination with what the Steelers have to offer, all the talent that they have, I think this is inevitably a good situation for the Steelers to compete once again. I'm not saying they're going to compete for a conference championship, much less a Super Bowl, but if they could win a playoff game or two, I think this investment in Russell Wilson, I think you would have to say, has paid off because they've gone further than they would have in the past couple years with Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and any other quarterback that they had. So Wilson is now the new quarterback in Pittsburgh. We're going to see how it all develops. They still have other issues to fill out in free agency and through the draft, but this was a big problem that they figured out in just the mere first couple hours of free agency. It happened early this morning after midnight, and it shook everything up for the NFL and all these other teams interested, but potentially not as much as the next segment I will get into after this break. I'm going to go into the second break of this episode, but on the other side, I'm going to talk about Kirk Cousins and his new home in Atlanta, Georgia, teaming up there with Drake London, Bijan Robinson, and Kyle Pitts. It's an exciting time to be an Atlanta Falcons fan, and I'll tell you why after this break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss that story, plus all the running back madness that happened on the first day of free agency.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Here to start the second half of the show, we're going to talk about Kirk Cousins and signing with the Atlanta Falcons. Two dominoes in the quarterback carousel have fallen, or at least two of the biggest ones have fallen today. If you missed the last segment, I talked about Russell Wilson and him signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I'll get into the story about Kirk Cousins signing with a new team and getting a lot of money, quite honestly, with the Atlanta Falcons. But before I do that, one last quick reminder to please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have during the show. Any questions, comments, or anything you want to say on any of these topics is very appreciated because it makes the show a lot more fun. So if you want to do that, use the link running across the ticker below me at gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you can't see it, the link is gsmcpodcast.net. It's greatly appreciated every time you guys do this for not only this show, but for all the shows across the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, Kirk Cousins signing with the Atlanta Falcons, it's a big deal for the main reason that the two biggest guys in the free agency market for quarterbacks are now gone. The Vikings couldn't get a deal agreed with Kirk Cousins. It was always in the works. You know, there was always reports that they engaged in talks. They were negotiating with the Minnesota Vikings. But the last hurdle to get over was that guaranteed money. The Vikings were a bit hesitant to give that money to Kirk Cousins. I'm not saying they felt that he didn't deserve it, but they could have felt that way. I don't have that information. It wasn't reported anywhere, but you have to think the Vikings were thinking long-term past Kirk Cousins. He's coming off a very bad Achilles injury. He's 35 years old. And do you want to give all that guaranteed money to a quarterback in Kirk Cousins' situation? They're hesitant because not only do they have to do that, they have to pay arguably the best receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. He wants to reset the wide receiver market And quite frankly, you might not have enough money to do both. So they just kept elongating these negotiations with Kirk Cousins. Now, time seemingly ran up on the Minnesota Vikings. It was the start of free agency today. They couldn't get anything done. So Diana Rossini, a reporter for The Athletic, said that upon the start of free agency today, Kirk Cousins was going to negotiate with the Atlanta Falcons first. And it turned out to be the only negotiations because just later on today, it broke that Kirk Cousins signed a 4-year deal to go to Atlanta and end his time in Minnesota. And, upon doing that, the number didn't come out, and I really wanted to know what kind of money the Falcons gave to Kirk Cousins to get him to sign so quickly. And it blew my mind because it was a 4-year, $180 million deal for Kirk Cousins. I know the Falcons needed a quarterback. It looked really bad last year with all the weapons that you have, but if you don't have a guy to get it to them, it looks really bad, and I know the Falcons are dying to get a guy better than what they had. But I don't know, I'm still iffy on the money because other than the 4 years, $180 million deal that it was, it's $50 million as a signing bonus and $100 million guaranteed. So if that was the number Kirk Cousins had in mind with the Vikings, if that's what he brought to the negotiation table with them, you can see why the Vikings might be hesitant to give $100 million guaranteed to a 35-year-old quarterback. But, the decision's made now. He will be moving on to Atlanta. And just more into the financial side of things, with the $45 million per year that he's making, Cousins will now be the 8th highest paid quarterback next season in terms of per year average. Deshaun Watson is at $46 million, and Josh Allen is just below him at $43 million. And he's also the number 9th highest paid quarterback in terms of just overall money at $180 million. Dak is just below him at $160, and then it jumps even higher to Deshaun Watson at $230. So, all the financials out of the way. Thinking now, what follows this? Kirk Cousins starts a new chapter in Atlanta. Initially, the positives are Atlanta get their quarterback. It was reported a lot that they wanted Kirk Cousins just because he fit the scheme that Zach Robinson was going to run there with the Falcons coming over from the Rams, as well as Raheem Morris coming over from the Rams. They had an idea of what this offense was supposed to look like. I'm sure, Raheem Morris trusts what Zach Robinson has in mind for this offense. So if this was Zach Robinson's call, it wasn't really made out there to be, but you could speculate that it was. He wanted a quarterback to fit the scheme, and it turned out to be Kirk Cousins. It was started to gain more and more traction as the days went on, and the other option on the table was obviously Justin Fields. He's from Atlanta. He seemed to be the favorite going into the NFL draft. A lot of people expected the deal to be done at the Combine. I should have said Combine before. There was a lot of trade rumors. There was a lot of talk. They asked the Bears general manager, Ryan Poles, about, who has reached out to him. He said it wasn't really anything too concrete in any offers he's received. And now, after the Combine, you're really left in this gray area where a lot of people have said these other teams don't have to go out and reach out to the Bears because there's a real possibility that Kirk Cousins didn't end up signing with the Vikings, or Baker Mayfield wasn't going to sign with the Bucs, and Baker and the Bucs, more so than Baker, made sure that Baker had no chance of talking with any other team, and they re-signed him to a 3-year, $100 million deal. But Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, went a different direction, and as soon as he negotiated with another team, he left the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the questions will arise that where will the Vikings go now from here? You've lost out on Baker. You lost out on Kirk. Are you willing to take a gamble on Justin Fields now? It seems like the most obvious option now because those three guys have been mentioned in all of the circles around quarterback-needy teams. And more so the Bears, are they willing to trade to an interdivision team in the Minnesota Vikings? Or what I would do regardless of what they offer me, I probably wouldn't trade them Fields because you don't want that risk of making a direct opponent that much better. Even if Fields won't be a game changer like quarterback, I still wouldn't do it if I was the Vikings. I would wait for other offers because at this point, if you're the Bears, you're not going to get what you expected right away. I don't think any team's going to offer a second round pick because a lot of those teams have really filled out their needs already in the quarterback position. The only other one I can think of could be the Las Vegas Raiders, but they also just signed Gardner Minshew as well as having Aiden O'Connell now on their team. And they have the 13th pick, if I'm not mistaken. So, they could still do something with that. Maybe trade up if they really like a quarterback. But I don't know. It seems now like it's a stretch for anybody or the Bears to try and get whatever they thought they had in mind first. Because I think, quite honestly, they waited too long. I don't believe that they didn't get a decent offer from anybody at the Combine. And if I were them, I probably would have taken the first 2 or 3 options that I had right away because now you're sitting at a position where you still have Justin Fields on your team and no one's coming to your door begging to get Justin Fields. Now you kind of have to go out there and sell him, which puts you in a very awkward spot. A lot of teams now have the leverage over you and you don't have the control in the conversations anymore if you're the Bears. Now, you could always keep him and trade back out of the number 1 spot. That's always an option. I've said on this show, that's probably the option I would go with. But, I think the Bears, everyone is already wrapped up in this Caleb Williams to the Bears scenario. He's had good meetings with them, and it just seems like that's going to be the option. So, what do you do now if you're the Vikings? It makes it interesting because of all that I just mentioned with the Bears not having the leverage. But will the Vikings fold now and offer them maybe a little bit too much? It's going to be a big cat and mouse game now. It even makes it more interesting because they're in the same division. And if they do trade them, it's going to be looked back on as one of the possibly dumbest moves by the Bears to trade Justin Fields and have him go on to have a lot of success with Justin Jefferson and the Minnesota Vikings. Or it would look like an extremely smart move by the Bears if they were to do it. All that still has to be worked out. And if you want to look at the Falcons now, more so on the positive side, does this turn them into immediate NFC contenders? I still have my questions about the whole NFC. If you're talking about just the division, I could definitely see that. Because the division in itself, the Panthers aren't any real threat. The Saints are hit or miss, in my opinion, with Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara. I think they still have some holes. Their biggest competition is going to be the Bucs because of the success that they had last year, bringing everybody back. That's going to be their biggest competition. But even then, they still stack up very well against the Bucs. And if Kirk Cousins plays like he was playing in the first half of last season, I think he might be, you could argue, a better quarterback than Baker is or was at that time last season in the first half. Kirk Cousins was mentioned in a lot of MVP conversations just on his numbers that he was producing last season in the first, I think, 5-6 games until he got hurt. So if you get that version of Kirk Cousins, plus the Drake London, the Kyle Pitts, the Bijan Robinsons, the Tyler Algiers, I think this could be very promising for the Falcons, but they are still young, so you have to take that into account. But having Kirk Cousins there, more so as a leader as well as the kind of player that he could be, I think it was a risk that the Falcons had to take. But I'm still holding out a little bit on expectations, talking about the whole NFC, because there are a lot of great teams, even better teams, now that I'm going to get into in just a few minutes with the running backs going to certain teams. But it's an exciting time because of the money, the moves that all the quarterbacks have been making, and we're going to see where this puts the Falcons because now, they don't really have too much else to worry about. They have to get a better pass rush, that's for sure, and eliminating the quarterback need just elevates that need to get a pass rusher now at number 8, where you can get a better pass rusher instead of using it on a quarterback and there not being a lot of pass rushing options in free agency, now you can really focus in on a high end defensive end, outside linebacker, whatever you want to call it, in the draft and not have to do anything, trade, move up, or do any of that sort of stuff. You can focus on that and potentially work on that secondary a bit as well. But this was, if I were to give a grade, an A minus, B plus move for the Falcons and for the Minnesota Vikings for not getting this done right away. It could affect how their negotiations go with Justin Jefferson and all that. If he doesn't believe in what they're planning, he could be gone. So for the Vikings, a C minus, C grade for them for waiting this long and not just giving in for Kirk Cousins. That's where they stand. The NFC is going to be even more fun to watch now next season, and I'm really looking forward to that. But not as much as I'm looking forward to talking about the final segment after this last break, the running back market and how quickly everybody flew off the shelf, a lot faster than I thought. I'm going to let you know where Tony Pollard is heading, Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Swift, where all of those guys are headed, all of them on brand new teams now, heading into next season. I'll tell you where they're going and my reaction to it. All of that coming up after this break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss all the information on the running backs. Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. We're going to dive into all the running backs that move teams, that have new experiences now heading into the new year in the NFL. Starting off with the first move that I saw today coming from the Chicago Bears. They agreed with running back DeAndre Swift to a 3-year, $24 million deal. He was, like I mentioned, the first running back off the market. And instantly he becomes their running back number one. He joins a pretty talented offense in DJ Moore. Now with him as the running back one, they have Cole Kmet, maybe Darnell Mooney if he sticks around. I know they have the quarterback to still figure out, but if it's Caleb Williams or Justin Fields, I still think a young, talented group like that, it's very exciting, but projections are one thing and reality, production is another thing. But, Swift signs there. Gets a decent deal for the market. He's around $8 million per year, which is what you'd expect for a running back of his caliber. And I think the Bears are happy to get a deal like this done. With Swift still at a relatively young age, it was a good deal for the Bears to move on and improve on that running back position heading into next year. The deal that followed that was Tony Pollard moving from the NFC over to the AFC and signing with the Tennessee Titans. The exact same deal as DeAndre Swift, a 3-year, $24 million deal. And this all but closes the door on Derrick Henry returning to the Tennessee Titans, if anybody still had any hope of that. I never really thought he would come back, but I know there are some fans that were holding out and thinking that Derrick Henry and the Titans could work out a deal if he got more money or something like that. But Derrick Henry, it was reported that his sensations were elsewhere. And now with the signing of Tony Pollard, they're going to start something new there with Will Levis, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Hopkins still there. They still have to figure out a wide receiver number 2. But again, I like the fit there for Pollard with the sort of money he got, $8 million per year, around the value that was rumored for these running backs. He's not going to be make or break really for the Titans, but I like the fit there to fit in with this new uprising, hopefully for the Titans, sort of offense. Then later on, just today, you saw Josh Jacobs sign with the Green Bay Packers, and when I wrote the notes, the details weren't disclosed, but I'm almost certain that I saw later, I didn't write it down, but just before I got on the show, the details came out and it was a 4-year, $48 million contract. I'm about 70% that that's right. And if it is right, he gets a lot of money than I think a lot of people were expecting, because Josh Jacobs didn't have the best of years last year in terms of production and how he performed for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was injured a good amount. So getting $12 million a year puts him in the top 5 or tied for the top 5 in terms of annual salary. He gets a good amount of money there for him. The Packers get a good running back to now replace Aaron Jones, because shortly thereafter they informed Aaron Jones that he was going to be released. The two sides couldn't agree on a restructuring of his deal. He was on the last year of his contract, and he was supposed to take a $17.5 million cap hit. And, the Packers wanted that to get reduced, change it a little bit with Aaron Jones, but neither side was budging. And with the signing now of Josh Jacobs, they in turn released Aaron Jones, and now he gets added to the market and is probably the best running back left other than Derrick Henry. I expect him to have a big market. The Texans, the Cowboys, all to be favored in those conversations. The Ravens as well, with uncertainty around their running back position. So those three are the biggest bidders in my opinion, but who knows where he'll end up. A lot of those teams have money, so he could get a lot more money, maybe not restructure his deal. We'll see where he ends up. But Josh Jacobs to the Green Bay Packers. Again, another running back joining a new team. It's a good fit in my opinion, but for the money and things like that, I still have questions, because Aaron Jones, I think, got hurt less than Josh Jacobs, and he was already there, familiar with everybody, so I'm not too sure of how successful they'll be early on. But Josh Jacobs, I still like him as a player. He just has to answer those injury questions for the Packers, and if they can do it, their offense is already pretty exciting with Jordan Love and all the young talent that they have. So it could have high rewards, but equally of a high risk for the Green Bay Packers. Before I get into the biggest one, Antonio Gibson signed a 3-year deal with the Patriots. Can't let him out. And before I mentioned Gus Edwards, just before I came on here, signed a 2-year deal with the Los Angeles Chargers. But getting those two out of the way, recognizing them for their deals, all power to them. The biggest one, Saquon Barkley signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. 3 years, $37.75 million, $26 million guaranteed, and he becomes the third highest paid running back on an average per year salary at $12.5 million, around the same that Derrick Henry makes and Alvin Kamara makes. And it's nuts when I saw this deal, because I was 100% convinced that he was going to go to the Texans. Get away from the NFC. You're not going to really play the Giants. It seemed like there was a lot of, love there, I guess, with Saquon, and having respect for the Giants to not have to play them. But forget all of that. Forget all that. He signs directly with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I couldn't believe it when it dropped. The Eagles obviously had to now find a replacement for DeAndre Swift, an adamant one to stay relevant in a very competitive division. And they snatch away one of their more direct rivals, his best player, and bring him onto their team. And now their offense is absolutely loaded. If you thought the tush push was unstoppable before, it got doubled that with Saquon Barkley being there, with Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert. Their O-line seeming to be still good, even with the retirement of Jason Kelce. And I don't know, it took him by surprise as well, because you think back to a few years ago, Daniel Jones gets that long-term deal, or maybe it might have been just last year. I think it was just last year. He got that long extension, and a lot of questions were made about Danny Dimes getting that extension or Saquon Barkley getting that money. To me personally, I think there really isn't a question there. There isn't a debate. Saquon Barkley has been there, put in the work with this team, been there since they were very good. Now they're on their low point of their trajectory. They're pretty bad, just in layman's terms, and he's always been there. He's rode it out with this team. They've stuck out with him because of his injury history. They still had confidence in him, and I just thought you repay the guy that's always been there, has given you everything that he's got, but instead you pay your quarterback, and I know the quarterback is probably the most important position in football, but you're talking about Daniel Jones, who, no disrespect to Daniel Jones, he is a solid quarterback. Athletically, he's very good. He's big, he's fast, he could do a lot with it. Brian Daboll, I think, showed us his full potential in his first year with the team, Brian Daboll that being. But I think it was no question, because Saquon was described as a generational talent coming out of the draft, out of Penn State. You drafted him number 3 overall, if I'm not wrong. And Daniel Jones picked at number 6. A lot of people didn't understand why he was picked at number 6. So that sort of conundrum that came out of that situation, deciding to sign Daniel Jones to that money, not Saquon, franchise tagging Saquon, and now, I think for Saquon, it hasn't been reported or anything, but you could speculate that personally, in terms of getting back at this team, the ultimate revenge, get back, whatever you want to call it, is signing with the Eagles and just tormenting them for the rest of your playing career, which will inevitably probably happen now, with the Giants not only losing out Saquon Barkley, but their defense got worse. Xavier McKinney signed with the Green Bay Packers, so they lost their 2 biggest players, more impactful, consistent players, in just the first day of free agency. And I alluded to that, I think just a few days ago. I think it was Thursday or Friday, where I talked about the biggest questions after the tag deadline. You couldn't explain to me why the Giants didn't tag Xavier McKinney, because of his talent, the safety market that was very good out there. Darnell Savage got signed. Justin Simmons is still out there, but Xavier McKinney was young, consistent, good, and he got signed on the first day. And now the Giants, instead of only losing one of their best players, lose both of them. And not only does Saquon leave, he goes to the Eagles. And every time they play now, will most likely remind them of why they shouldn't have let him go, why they should have paid him. And going on to the Eagles now a little bit more, they make their offense a lot better. And just the thought that I had in terms of the Eagles now with Saquon and their offense seemingly to be impossible to stop, almost a juggernaut offense. I don't want to say it puts more pressure on Jalen Hurts, but it's just a thought out there, If things don't pan out as they should, they still struggle in terms of red zone production, just offense as a whole. I think a lot of eyes are going to be drawn nowhere near Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. A lot of the criticism will fall on Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts to some extent as well, because head coach, quarterback, the responsibilities that come with that. But because Jalen Hurts is coming off a really great year, then he made the Super Bowl, then dipping a little bit because of all the coordinators that were switching in and out around the organization. That's fine. You can get a pass for that. But now you're into this new year. Kellen Mond is your new offensive coordinator. He had success with the Dallas Cowboys inside the division. He knows what Saquon's all about. I'm sure he's going to use him to the best of his abilities. And, no one's going to look at the other guys. A lot of people are going to look at Jalen Hurts because there's no coordinator switching ups. He's got an even better offense now. And if it still looks shaky, it could turn out very harsh on Jalen Hurts. I'm not saying it will, or I expect it to, but that's just an idea that I thought of when I saw this. If things don't pan out well, where will the excuses fall? Where will the blame fall? And I think unfairly, you could say, it will fall to Jalen Hurts or Nick Sirianni, and they might have to take the heat and have to respond if the offense in this team isn't pushing for NFC conference contention now with the sort of offense that they have. I know their defense was really lacking towards the end of last year, and they still have questions around it, but it's not very bad where they can't still compete. They also signed Bryce Huff, a pass rusher from the New York Jets, to a 3-year deal, which will inevitably mean that either Montez Sweat or Hassan Reddick will be, not Montez Sweat, Josh Sweat will be traded. Either him or Hassan Reddick will be traded just because of cap money hits, but they still need a linebacker, safety, potentially corner. I think they'll figure it out, but offensively, they're going to put up points now, is my estimation, and the defensive deficiencies won't be as magnified, but saying that if your offense has a rough day, it's going to look worse, and it could be very bad for Jalen Hurts or Nick Sirianni. But in this moment, stealing Saquon Barkley away from the Giants, absolute boss move from Howie Roseman and the Eagles. I love it. I think it was crazy, just cold-blooded move by Saquon and the Eagles to steal him away. I feel bad for the Giants in some aspect, but, that's business in the NFL. There's really no love lost or really any just emotions left on after these negotiations happen, and it's crazy. First day of NFL free agency. To wrap it up with this news, I'm sure there's going to be more news just the rest of this day, but that's all the running back free agent news I have, and that's all the time I'm going to have for you guys on this episode. Again, I want to give a big thank you to everyone who tuned into the show, everyone who listened while the show was going on or afterwards as well. I want to remind you guys to, again, follow us on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for more content, not just around sports, but content all over the podcast network. If you want to see more of me and more of this content on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, you can go on to the Sports Network channel or the GSMC Podcast Network channel and see all the past live shows that are on there recorded, or YouTube shorts that I produce every day, as well as individual segment videos if you missed a segment video or you want to tune in to a specific one that you saw that day. As always, I've been your host, Manny Maradiege, reminding you that this show is live every day at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me on those days for more NFL and football conversations. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.